Hi, I'm Dr. Alan Bogart, and I'm going to be talking to you today about organizational behavior, and more specifically, we're going to be talking about the realm of personality traits, personality differences, and the fact that we all have different personality types. The fact of the matter is, a lot of the time, people aren't necessarily being difficult, they're just different. And I think that appreciation of the fact that people are different leads to greater tolerance and ultimately translates into us understanding people better and then being more effective in terms of the way that we lead them and in terms of the way that we manage them. Here's a question for you. Do you understand the different lenses through which people see the world? The fact of the matter is we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. We all have these lenses. We have ways of perceiving the world. We have ways of taking information, ways of making decisions. And they're tremendously different from potentially the person standing next to you. So there's one way that you do things. There's another way the person next to you may be doing things. And sometimes just an understanding of personality types leads to greater collaboration. Anticipated outcomes for today include the ability and the skill in terms of recognizing composites of different personality types, as well as understanding the impact of personality differences in the workplace when managing people. Looking at personality types is nothing new. Here's a slide which speaks to that fact. In 1976, we started hearing about the 4 temperaments, and more recently, we started hearing about personality types, as orchestrated and birthed by Carl Jung way back in 1923, but it's been refined through the years to something very, very specific right now. I'm sure you've heard of the 4 elements, whereby it's been quite useful, and it's almost a fun exercise to do, is to think of somebody that you know. It could be a loved one, a spouse, a relative, and of the following 4 words which I'm about to mention, which word would you associate best with that person? And here are the 4 words: air, water, earth, or fire. If I think of somebody that's close to me, for argument's sake, if I use my wife as an example, if I think of her, of those 4 words, earth, water, fire, the word that immediately comes to my mind when it comes to her is water, because she's somebody that typically just goes with the flow. She's easygoing. If I think of myself, it's probably earth, because I tend to be rather centered in terms of the way that I think and go about living. We're going to talk specifically, though, about Jungarian types. One of the ways of looking at this is to consider the fact that we all have preferences. Personality is really around preferences. We all prefer different ways of doing things. And these preferences, as is personality, because personality is best defined as a dynamic and integrated system based on a wide range of developmental as well as hereditary characteristics. So given that we have different background experiences, different developmental experiences, there's certain things which are hereditary, we have these differences today. And we have these preferences. And one of the preferences has to do with the area called energy flow. Where do we get our energy from? Where do we get our energy? Where do we draw our source of power, our power for existing, our power for living? When it comes to energy, some people prefer a more extroverted mode. In other words, they draw energy from outside of themselves, from things happening, people and events. They draw energy from that which is outside of themselves and respond best to that. So if the person's tired, in one example that I'm aware of, is that a person was particularly tired and then actually called a bunch of friends together and said, let's get together, let's have a chat, and in that way drew energy from the people around them. Other people have a more introverted preference. In other words, they draw energy from within themselves. They draw energy from the world of thoughts, reflections, and perceptions. So a case in point would be, if I asked a person to draw the ideal holiday, the more extroverted person would draw a holiday with a lot of people around, a lot of friends around, and they'd be very much a part of that. An introverted preference would be a person that actually would probably draw themselves alone on a beach, reading a book with maybe just a few friends around. It's really about preferences. And here's what's important to understand about these particular differences and preferences, and it's this. If you prefer a more extroverted mode, if you would classify or describe yourself as being an extrovert, recognize that you also have introverted qualities. If you're an extrovert, it doesn't mean that you never need downtime. It doesn't mean that you never prefer to be alone. It's a preference. One is slightly stronger than the other. If you're an introverted person, then you draw energy from within, but there are times where you would need other people to give you with energy. So it's really about preferences. There's no hard and fast. None of us are completely one way at the expense of the other. A nice way to think about personality differences, and particularly extroversion and introversion, is that they are complementary lifestyles. Introverts need extroverts, and extroverts need introverts. There are fundamental differences, absolutely. Introverts tend to add depth to life, whereas extroverts tend to add breadth to life. But we're going to move on now, and we're going to move to the next scale of differences. And that has to do with how we process information. And the two ways of processing information is essentially around something called sensing and something called intuition. Now, sensing type people, they prefer processing information by way of the 5 senses. They like information that they can feel, see, touch, hear. They're very concrete people, and they process information in a linear way. They like information that they can actually work with. They like the evidence. Intuitive type people prefer working with patterns and possibilities, and very quickly they can see interdependencies and the relationships between things. They're able to connect the dots quite quickly. Sensing type people tend to live very much in the present moment, whereas intuitive type people tend to think a lot about the future. Again, they are complementary lifestyles. Sensing type people very rarely make errors of fact, whereas intuitive type people, they're quite quick, they're intuitive, they're instinctive, and sometimes they do make errors of fact. An interesting comment which was once made was the fact that intuitive people actually provide life with inspiration, whereas sensing type people, it's all about the perspiration. The intuitive person gets the idea, but they need a strong sensing type person to actually get the work done. So you can see how the two actually complement each other. Moving on to the next area or next scale of preference, and this has to do with how we make decisions. Some people prefer to make decisions using thinking, and some people prefer to make the same decision, render a judgment on the same situation using feeling. And the fundamental difference is this. Thinking type people make decisions based on logic and analysis, cause and effect. They look at the evidence, and the evidence speaks to them, and they would make a decision purely on the evidence. A feeling type person would look at that same evidence, but immediately ask questions like this. What is the impact of this decision on the team? Typically, they would take people-centered concerns into consideration when making a decision. Now, again, we can see how both is important. I had this situation in a previous company that I worked for where the MD, the managing director, was a feeling type person. He had a very strong F in his profile. He would always take his values into consideration, the values of people-centered concerns into consideration when making a decision. And the 2RC of the company was very much a thinking person. So one person would say, so the feeling person would say, what impact is this decision going to have on our people? And the thinking person would say, well, you know what, let's go by the evidence. This is what's right for the business. So typically these two gentlemen would collaborate and arrive at a more suitable decision that would meet the needs of the organization in terms of the decision that needed to be made, as well as the needs of people in the process. And again, it's the mix of the two that actually complements efficiencies, effectiveness, and ongoing success. So both are important. The next scale we're going to look at has to do with lifestyle. How do we live our lives? And the two scales here are essentially judgment on the one hand and perceiving on the other. Now, if you have a J in your profile, if you are a judging person, it doesn't mean that you judge others. All that judging actually means here is that when it comes to lifestyle, when it comes to living, we prefer a more planned, structured, routine approach to life. J-type people will go to a shopping mall and typically have a list. So they would go into the mall, they would have their list, and they would cross off things from that list as they acquire those items. When it comes to a list of activities, that's what they have. They have a list of activities. And sometimes they even go so far as to do something, and then they see it's not on their list, so they put it on their list and then cross it off. So J-type people are very sequential, they're very structured, they're very planned, and they love sticking to that plan. A J-type person, by way of example, would have an idea of what time their friends should come and visit. So typically, they would invite their friends to a particular gathering. And then they'd also have an idea well ahead of time of what they're going to give those friends to eat. They also have an idea of what time they would like those people to leave. And then a J gets a little unstuck when people don't leave when he or she had intended or thought about what time that they should leave. A P-type person, on the other hand, is more perceptive, more spontaneous, more carefree. A P-type person would wake up in the morning and say, what are we going to do today? And if a P-type person goes on holiday, they would typically not even think about where they're going to stop to refuel the motor vehicle. They would just go, they would enjoy the present moment, and they never appear terribly rushed, and they're not particularly good at deadlines. So again, the two, we need both to actually to complement each other. So those are four very broad scales in terms of understanding personality differences. By way of summary, energy flow, where we draw energy from, we're either extroverts or introverts. Extroverts, depth to life; introverts, breadth to life. And you'll notice behind me is a number of slides that actually gives you a lot more characteristics of each of the two types. Secondly is processing information, and there's something I actually wanted to add to this. It's not only in terms of how we process information. Sure, some of us process information by way of the senses, the 5 senses. Others process information intuitively. It's about how we process information, and we're all bombarded with information every moment of every day. So how we process it is important. But it's also, this scale also speaks to what information we pay attention to. So sensing type people would pay attention to particular information, and intuitive people would pay attention to another sort of information. And I think that's critical because people pay attention to different things. That's why when there's a car accident, it's two people have seen exactly the same car accident, but when they relate the story to others, they relate two entirely different stories. It's because they were paying attention to different things, therefore they saw different things. Remember what I said at the outset, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. By way of reminder and by way of summary, making decisions, two very different ways of making decisions. The thinking person makes decisions more with the head. The feeling type person makes decisions using more of the heart. Two complementary ways of making decisions. And finally, lifestyle. Another example of lifestyle in terms of judging and perception would be the following. I once had a young man who helped me paint my roof. And I paid him a certain sum of money. I left in the morning. I'm expecting, at least a whole section of my roof to be painted. And all day I sat in the office and I was thinking about my roof. I was thinking about when I get home I would see like this huge chunk of effort, this huge chunk of work, this huge section of the roof that had been painted. When I got home, I noticed that he'd painted a section here and a section there, and I was terribly upset about this. The truth is, he possibly wasn't as structured as what I was. He got the job done with the same quality, the same degree of professionalism. He just went about it a different way. So the value of understanding personality preferences is, again, recognizing that people aren't being difficult, they're just different. We have different ways of doing things. But it's that diversity and embracing that diversity is really what we need. We need a thinking and we need an approach to people, to leading and managing them, which recognizes those differences, because each of these particular types are gifted and valuable. Thank you.